Good evening, wanderer of stories. Tonight you find yourself on the banks of the Great Nile, under a vault of stars so bright they outshine your smartphone screen. Here, cradle yourself in the memory of reed-strewn floors and drifting papyrus whispers. You probably won't survive this assignment, but at least your mattress is comfier. Find a comfortable spot, allow your shoulders to soften, and let the steady rhythm of your breath guide you towards stillness. While you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy my work. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what hour glows on your clock. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As dusk spills across the desert, shifting sands cool enough to release faint tendrils of warmth, the people of ancient Egypt prepared for sleep on humble platforms woven from river reeds. You watch as a craftsman tightens straps of palm fiber around a rectangular frame lifted a foot off the earthen floor. These rudimentary beds, surprisingly sturdy, elevated sleepers above scuttling scarabs and damp ground, a practical design echoed by modern camping cots, though lacking in aluminum legs and cup holders. Historians still argue whether every household enjoyed such raised sleeping rigs, or if only wealthier families could spare the resources for them. Once the reed mattress is in place, linen sheets are unfurled. Soft as a cloud, if you could imagine. Clouds in the desert, though closer to the thread count of a bargain bin hotel. Owners dab scented oils into the fibers, a blend of cedarwood, frankincense, and the occasional heavy-lidded jasmine. The air fills with a perfume so soothing you almost forget that your nearest neighbor is a crocodile wearing a toothy grin. Fringe whispers suggest that after a particularly elaborate festival, some nobles bathed their bedding in date wine, believing that sweet vinegary stains would induce erotic dreams. Modern scientists remain skeptical of fermented fabric therapy, but admit a pleasant aroma can indeed ease tension before bedtime. By candlelight, those small clay oil lamps burning sesame seed oil, you witness families reclining side by side on the platform, mothers humming lullabies in hushed tones. Children cling to miniature reed pillows, carved with hieroglyphs spelling out protective charms. One oddball fragment from a tomb painting depicts a pillow stuffed not with rushes, but with crushed beetles, supposedly to ward off nightmares. Although entomologists scoff, a recent study did confirm that certain insect oils can repel mosquitoes. So perhaps those ancient dreamers were onto something practical amid their superstition. As night deepens, the nearby irrigation canals shimmer like molten mercury, every so often rippling with the passage of a crocodile or a tired fisherman returning home. A breeze carries the faint scent of papyrus drying on riverbanks, crisp and slightly grassy, mingling with the aroma of roasting falafel from street vendors packing up after a long day. This sensory tapestry reminded ancient Egyptians of Ma'at, the divine balance, and they believed a peaceful night's rest under balanced cosmic forces ensured harmony in both dream and waking life. By the first watch, around 2 hours after sunset, many households performed a minor ritual. Someone would sprinkle handfuls of powdered myrrh onto the linen, a gesture meant to coax restful slumber. Occasionally, a superstitious soul would mix in a pinch of ash from the burned remains of a sacrificed duck, convinced that ancestral spirits would then hover close, warding off nightmares. Historians still argue whether such grisly rites were widespread or confined to fringe sects whose tombs we've yet to find. The wealthiest citizens replaced reed mats entirely with wooden bedsteads carved from sycamore or acacia, adorned with inlays of ebony and ivory. They slept on layered linens and wool blankets, dyed in hues of deep indigo and sandstorm yellow, colours mirroring the sky at dawn and dusk. Silk was unknown, but the Egyptian flax provided surprisingly smooth textures that made even a top-tier modern sheet set look threadbare by comparison. Yet beneath the grandeur lay a shared vulnerability. Everyone feared the desert chill that crept in after midnight when temperatures could drop sharply, causing even seasoned sleepers to shiver beneath their linen layers. Outside the city walls, labourers on the pyramid projects brought their own straw pallets, propped atop mud brick platforms they built themselves. At twilight, they'd rest with muscles aching from hauling stone blocks heavier than most contemporary cars. This communal exhaustion bred camaraderie, and occasional bouts of laughter when someone snored so loudly it echoed off the pyramid stones like a distorted trumpet. Fringe lore holds that sound waves from those snores once caused a minor collapse in a half-finished pyramid, prompting engineers to install soundproof reed screens, though evidence remains scant, and modern architects still debate whether structural resonance could ever pose such a risk. As the final lamp guttered and guttered out, you sense the hush of the Nile night envelop you. The last image is of a lone star blinking above the horizon, promising another day of sand, sweat, and celestial wonder. Here, sleep is not merely rest, it is an act of faith that the river will rise again, crops will flourish, and the gods of dream and desert will smile upon your slumber. As twilight settles over the marble columns of the agora, the soft clatter of sandals fades, and the once bustling marketplace adopts a quieter breath. In classical Athens, sleep was less a private affair and more a communal symphony of snores, murmurs, and the occasional philosophical debate overheard in the dark. Archaeological remains of shared dormitories near gymnasia tell us that unmarried men often slumbered side by side on raised wooden platforms, cushioned by layered goat hair blankets, a stark contrast to the solitary bedroom sanctums of modern urban apartments. By law, citizens were expected to maintain vigilance even in rest. Many complexes featured a single lantern hung from an iron hook, its sputtering flame casting dancing shadows that nudged sleepers toward light dozing instead of deep unconsciousness. Fringe accounts claim that some Athenian landlords deliberately underfilled oil jars to cultivate an atmosphere of mild paranoia, believing that rest kept shallow is ideal for civic virtue. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or merely the paranoid fancy of property-speculating sophists. Within these communal chambers, scents mingled in an olfactory tapestry, the musk of warmed wool mingling with the sharp tang of olive oil lanterns. Every so often, a young philosopher would collapse from exhaustion after an all-night symposium, the echo of his disjointed arguments bouncing off stucco walls until a roommate tossed a damp rag to silence him. This absurdity echoes modern college dormitories, where someone invariably sets off a late-night pizza delivery siren, reminding us that shared sleep has always been punctuated by neighborly disturbances. Comfort levels varied widely. Wealthier metics furnished their platforms with thick wool rugs dyed in crimson and lapis lazuli blue, colors imported from Phoenicia at great expense, while poorer citizens rested on simple wooden slats, topped with straw mats. Despite these disparities, the dictum of Spartan influence lingered. The ideal sleeper embraced minimal cushioning, believing that resilience forged in hardship was preferable to becoming soft and effete. Modern research into mattress firmness has shown that medium-firm supports can alleviate back pain, but few contemporary sleepers volunteer to toss aside memory foam for a hunk of hand-chiseled wood. As the night deepened, chamber doors opened to admit cool breezes funneled through carefully oriented cuttings in the stone walls. The play of moonlight across mosaic floors formed shifting patterns that some superstitious residents interpreted as divine portents. A few rare papyrus scroll fragments mention that dream interpreters, on call like late-night therapists, would wander between beds, offering cryptic indulgences to those troubled by nightmares. Whether these onorologoi were genuine seers or opportunistic charlatans remains debated in scholarly circles, and historians still argue whether their interpretations influenced political decisions or were mere bedtime entertainment. Near the far end of the hall, a communal basin of water infused with crushed laurel leaves stood ready for pre-sleep ablutions. Men would splash their faces, hoping to wash away the day's grime and whittle down the chatter in their minds. The laurel's faint piney aroma lingered on their skin, an early aromatherapy of sorts, though any anxiety relief was promptly undermined by the echo of midnight drunks returning from symposia, performing impromptu recitals of Homeric epics off-key. Sleep segmentation was common. At roughly midnight, a bell would toll once, prompting many to rise for the first watch, a half-hour of communal stretching, whispered gossip, and the occasional murmur of philosophical maxims. In one oddly practical twist, some chambers installed rudimentary acoustic baffles, woven from reeds and goat hair, to muffle snoring, Fringe sources suggest that an eccentric sophist once proposed granting extra civic favors to residents who slept silently, but evidence of any practical implementation remains elusive, and modern scholars still argue whether such incentives ever existed. By the second watch, bridges of candlelight had dwindled to sputtering coals. A hush descended, broken only by the gentle susurrus of city sounds beyond the walls, distant barking dogs, the drip of water from aqueduct sluices, and the faint scrape of a cart rolling along cobblestones. In these moments, the agora chambers became a microcosm of Athenian society, a place where democratic ideals met the realities of bodily need, and where the boundary between public and private life blurred into a soft, shared darkness. At dawn's first light, the lantern would be ceremonially extinguished, and sleepers awakened by the gentle tug of bedrolls being rolled for the day's activities. Some claimed that segmented sleep allowed for informal councils to convene under the guise of early morning stretches, but whether these tete-shaped policy or simply delayed the labour of sunrise remains a point of contention among classicists. As you gaze upon the empty platforms, the faint imprint of countless bodies seems to linger in the grain of the wood and the softness of the straw. The agora's slumber circles remind us that sleep, even in its most communal form, has always been a balancing act between vulnerability and camaraderie. A reminder that history's greatest thinkers rested not in isolated luxury, but side by side, sharing the same creaking floors and whispered dreams. As the sun climbs above the floating gardens of Tenochtitlan, its heat radiates off the chinampas like a great stone oven, coaxing weary workers to seek shaded reprieve. In the heart of the island city, Aztec citizens carved narrow canals between beds of maize and squash, creating miniature islands that cooled the air and offered gentle breezes over the water. By formal decree, labourers engaged in monumental public works, building temples and causeways, were allotted a brief midday pause, a practice echoed in modern siestas, though lacking air-conditioned cars and canned soft drinks. Archaeological surveys confirm that chinampas were separated by narrow waterways just wide enough for a single canoe, allowing hammock poles to be anchored between trees leaning over the canals. Frequently, men and women draped woven cotton hammocks from willow branches, swaying gently above the water. Fringe legends tell of certain noble families importing exotic jungle vines to hang their hammocks, convinced that the unfamiliar scent would inspire prophetic dreams. Historians still argue whether these imported vines were genuinely psychoactive or simply fanciful status symbols in a city obsessed with prestige. Across the city's main causeway, merchants paused as they loaded bright feathered capes onto shoulder poles. They slung hammocks knotted with dyed cotton in iridescent patterns, designed to reflect sunlight and attract customers. This midday interlude became a social ritual. Vendors laid out offerings of maize, cakes, and chia porridge, while sleepers exchanged gossip about rising tribute demands. One curious codex entry describes a merchant who reportedly filled his hammock with ground obsidian dust, claiming its sparkle warded off bothersome midnight mosquitoes, though whether anyone survived the skin, irritations remains a subject of scholarly debate. The midday rest also served practical purposes. Chinampa farmers often used this time to inspect irrigation ditches, ensuring floodwaters remained at optimal heights for squash and tomatoes. Engineers constructed small sluice gates from wood and stone to regulate flows, an innovation that modern agronomists still study for sustainable wetland farming. These sluice systems prevented the soil from becoming waterlogged, a problem familiar to anyone who's forgotten to adjust the sprinkler timer in a suburban garden. In the central plaza, royal edicts mandated that communal hammocks be provided for elderly citizens and veterans who could no longer toil in the fields. These hammocks were sometimes woven from agave fibers stiffened with resin, intended to keep sleepers elevated and free from damp ground-borne ailments. Fringe sources claim that a secret guild of hammock weavers infused their ropes with powdered ground jade, believing it would grant the napping elderly flashes of past glories. Modern gerontologists, however, remain skeptical of any physiological benefits beyond improved comfort, and historians still argue whether such jade-infused wrappings were ever widespread or simply the stuff of embellished tribute payments. On festival days, the midday siesta transformed into a full mid-afternoon rite. priests of Tlaloc emerged from rain temples carrying incense burners shaped like jaguar heads. They moved among the hammock clusters, sprinkling copal resin and chanting invocations for gentle rain. The fragrance mingled with the earthy aroma of wet mud and citrus blossoms from the chinampa orchards. Although some sources refer to this as a purely symbolic gesture, ethnobotanists propose that traces of psychoactive compounds in the copal might have induced hazy reveries among the reclining populace. As shadows lengthen toward the second half of the day, hammocks are unhooked from their supports and rolled into storage baskets woven from reeds. Workers shake off drowsiness to resume construction work or market duties, sometimes lulled back into unexpected naps on their return canoes. From the vantage point of the Templo Mayor, one can imagine the city's pulse accelerating again under the late afternoon sun, all thanks to a carefully timed ritual of repose. Scholars still debate whether this structured pause improved productivity or simply provided a culturally sanctioned excuse for urban napping. Before sunset, the canals of Tenochtitlan reflect a sky streaked with pink and gold, the air humming with cicadas. The midday hammocks lie empty, silent testaments to a society that revered sleep as both necessity and ceremony. In these quiet moments, the ingenious balance between labor and leisure becomes clear, revealing how the Aztecs sculpted rest into the very fabric of their day. By candlelit hearths across medieval Europe, the night was cleaved in two. After the sun dipped below the horizon, households extinguished their faggots of firewood and lit rushlights, bundles of dried reeds steeped in animal fat that sputtered with a faint crackle. These humble flames cast wavering shapes across stone walls, inviting both comfort and unease. First sleep, or prima somnus, began soon after dusk, lasting roughly 3 to 4 hours before sleepers awakened for a period of wakefulness known as the watch. In those hours between slumbers, families performed countless nightly rites. Some households gathered around low tables to eat leftover stew from earlier in the day, the mingled aromas of parsnip, boiled barley, and the fatty remnants of salted pork hanging heavy in the air. Historians still argue whether this nocturnal repast served purely practical needs, or if it evolved into a sacred moment of communal bonding under the watching stars. In wealthier manors, courtiers used this window to pen letters by the flicker of tallow candles, their black ink crawling across parchment like shadowy vine tendrils. Across villages, clairvoyant wise women, sometimes called bone setters or dream witches, would wander from cottage to cottage, offering to interpret dreams. One chronicler recorded a tale of a midwife who claimed that placing a sprig of rue under one's head summoned prophetic visions of impending childbirth complications. Fringe chronicles suggest that some desperate souls tucked dried wolfberries into their pillows, believing the berry's bitter tang would keep nightmares at bay. Modern folklorists debate if these practices were widespread customs or isolated folk tales preserved by ecclesiastical scribes with a penchant for the sensational. Meanwhile, the flickering light revealed the faintest rumble of critters scuttling through earthen floors and the distant howl of night livestock. In great halls, servants moved quietly, relighting hearth fires, replenishing rushlights, or fetching more soft wool blankets for nobles who feared the cold that seeped through unglazed windows. The sudden warmth of a new coal emboldened one paranoid footman to sprinkle handfuls of dried lavender into the ashes, prized for its scent, but also rumoured to appease restless spirits lingering among midnight. Sleepers. Scholars still argue whether lavender's calming properties were recognised in the Middle Ages or retroactively ascribed by later herbalists. As the church bells tolled the midnight hour, marking the end of first sleep, some devout individuals rose for whispered prayers called the nocturnal vigilance. In abbeys and cathedrals, monks shuffled into cloisters, illuminated by clusters of iron chandeliers, their steps echoing against cold flagstones. They recited the psalms of matins, their Gregorian chants resonating through arched ceilings in a haunting lullaby of devotion. Although modern listeners might find such chants soporific, medieval monks believed these sacred verses fortified the soul against diabolical temptations lurking in the witching hours. In peasant huts, the less pious engaged in simpler activities, mending fishing nets by nocturnal lamplight or quietly watching the river beyond the thatch roof. A surviving tax record notes that certain riverside hamlets imposed fines on fishermen who failed to return from late-night labours before first sleep, while other edicts mandated that communal ovens be stoked at midnight so that morning bread could be baked at dawn. This ordinance ensured no family woke to an empty hearth, though modern historians debate whether it was driven by genuine concern or the crown's need to regulate food supplies. Later, as footsteps receded and psalms faded, candles burned lower, and many lay back down for their second sleep, secunda somnus. The brief interlude of wakefulness became woven into cultural lore. Some regarded it as a gift of contemplative time, others as an awkward inconvenience interrupting dreams. One curious parish record describes a farmer who slept through both segments entirely, rising only at cockcrow, and was deemed eccentric for flouting nature's ordained rhythm. Fringe scholars speculate that a handful of individuals practiced monophasic sleep even then, though evidence remains thin, and historians still argue whether continuous sleep existed at all in medieval society. Within bedchambers, the mattress was a simple pile of straw and chaff stuffed into a linen sack covered by worn wool blankets that bore the faint odour of lanolin. Peasant families shared these mattresses, with parents on one side, children at their feet, and, in colder regions, the occasional barn cat wedged in between for warmth. The cat's purring, combined with the low rumble of remembrance hymns carried on the wind, lulled sleepers back into dreams of harvest festivals and saintly apparitions. It is said, though sources are scant, that some farmers tucked sprigs of mistletoe among the bedding to invoke the protection of oak spirits, belief that modern botanists view as charming myth rather than practical pest control. In the great towns, chamber pots were stationed by bedsides, filled with clean water and scented with rosemary sprigs. Servants would carry the contents to the midden at first light, a chore none relished. Yet the mere presence of water in a vessel served an unusual secondary purpose. Superstitious villagers insisted that if a broken pot was discovered the next morning, it portended plague or divine wrath. Historians still argue how pervasive such beliefs were and whether they influenced public health responses during outbreaks of the Black Death. As secunda somnus deepened, the hushed world outside glowed faintly under a silvery moon. Through narrow shutters, the black silhouette of a distant cliff or church steeple stood sentinel over the sleeping land. The busy chaos of daily life seemed impossibly remote, softened by the elegance of sleep's return. Everywhere, hearth embers died to orange embers before fading to grey, and every household took on the quiet veil of a collective dream. By the time the first rooster crow broke the night's trance, sleepers awoke with memories of scattered dreams. The snip of a shepherd's crook, the scent of fresh oats, the echo of organ pipes from a distant chapel. They rolled out of their straw mattresses, rubbed sleep from their eyes, and prepared to greet the day's labours, carrying with them the whispered secrets of the watch. In that half-forgotten realm between consciousness and slumber, medieval Europe wove its own tapestry of night, reminding us that even in darkness, humanity sought ritual, comfort, and a measure of control over the uncertain world. As dusk's gentle glow yields to the lantern-lit streets of Japan in Edo-period, a hush settles over sliding shoji doors and polished Ingawa verandas. The ritual of bedding down begins with the folding away of the day's clutter. Low wooden desks are slid into alcoves, inkstones sealed in lacquered boxes, and guests' tatami mats brushed clean with soft horsehair brooms. In most homes, the tatami floor itself serves as foundation for slumber, its tightly woven straw offering both firmness and a whisper of warmth beneath sleeping bodies. Each evening, a servant, or in smaller households, the head of the family, unrolls futon mattresses, layering a cotton-filled shikibuton upon the tatami. In wealthier samurai residences, these may be replaced by thicker silk-stuffed futons imported from Kyoto, while the average merchant family used locally produced cotton, prized for its resilience against nightly condensation. Historians still argue whether the typical Edo household owned more than 2 sets of bedding or relied on communal futon exchanges in designated courtyards where neighbours lent fresh linens each season. Once the shikibuton is spread, a lighter cake buton, a quilted coverlet stuffed with bast fibre, is draped over the futon. In colder regions, families might layer additional blankets woven from hemp or silken underclothes stitched into makeshift duvets. Fringe sources describe a practice among Mount Hiei monks of brushing cake bouton with powdered saffron petals, believing the golden dust would stimulate vivid dreams of enlightenment. Modern sleep researchers generally dismiss any direct impact of saffron on REM cycles, yet agree that the ritual's meditative application could ease tension before sleep. Central to the pillow ceremony is the makura, a small wooden or ceramic headrest shaped to cradle the neck while maintaining airflow to the scalp. Nobles sometimes lined these with twigs of hinoki cypress, the wood's subtle, camphor-like scent thought to ward off restless spirits. A scroll in the Peabody Essex Museum notes that certain courtiers stuffed makura with dried millet husks mixed with powdered camellia oil, convinced the combination would preserve elaborate coiffures and induce pleasant reveries of tea ceremonies yet to come. Whether these pillow fillings ever achieved such lofty goals is debated by textile historians, and scholars still argue whether the makura's true origin was medicinal or purely symbolic. After arranging the futon and pillow, family members partake in a brief ablution called yu-gei, washing hands and faces at an adjacent wash basin fed by bamboo pipes. The trickle of water echoes through dark hallways, mingling with the faint clatter of getter sandals as servants retreat. The cool droplets against weary skin feel bracing, almost shocking, yet leave behind a clean scent of well water and stone. A primitive form of modern skincare ritual without the fancy moisturizers and LED lights. Next comes the final pre-sleep gesture, a soft benediction to the household kami. In modest homes, this involves the simple bow of gratitude before a kamidana shelf, where rice offerings and sake cups await the morning's replenishment. A surviving diary fragment recounts a merchant's wry note about forgetting to replace his offering once, fearing misfortune until an unusually cooperative business negotiation followed the next day. Fringe accounts suggest that some Edo-period gamblers tucked omamori charms under their cake bouton, hoping to dream of winning lottery numbers. Historians still argue whether such charms were relics of Shinto practice or later additions influenced by Buddhist talismans. In wealthier districts of Nihonbashi, lanterns are extinguished in a carefully choreographed sequence. Young pages pad along corridors, relighting bedside lamps for older relatives who prefer a final moment of reading hearthside. The smell of burning washi paper drifts through corridors, merging with the earthy aroma of tatami and the occasional waft of incense, typically agarwood or sandalwood, used sparingly to avoid overwhelming sensitive noses. Though some Edo literature romanticizes midnight scent ceremonies, historians debate if ordinary households could afford enough incense for nightly use, or if such scenes were poetic embellishments by town novelists. With the lights dimmed, the city outside grows distant, a tapestry of roaring river barges and whispered gossip, now muted beneath wooden shutters. The hush is broken only by the soft creak of sliding doors or the faint chirp of a cricket nestled in a potted bonsai. These ambient sounds become a lullaby, a natural white noise that anchors sleepers in the present moment. Modern sleep studies recognize similar patterns in nature, sounds aiding deep rest, though few practitioners have suggested recruiting insects for nocturnal serenades. As the household drifts towards slumber, Edo-period doctors prescribed a final tonic for troubled minds, katsura tea, brewed from the bark of the Japanese Judas tree. Its mild sedative properties were believed to ease insomnia, yet contemporary pharmacologists note that any calming effect is likely due to the warm ritual of its consumption rather than pharmacological action. Fringe herbalists of the era sometimes blended katsura bark with powdered mandarin peel, aiming to sweeten flavor and aroma, a combination whose real efficacy remains elusive, and scholars still argue whether these mixtures were medicinal or purely culinary experiments. Deep into night, the futon bears the slight indentations of sleepers' shoulders and hips, and the silence settles into the crevices of each room. Occasionally, a distant woodblock print workshop will hum a late press, the gentle thudding of blocks offering a rhythmic backdrop, akin to a modern white noise machine. In some ryokan inns along the Tokaido Road, weary travelers found these nocturnal echoes comforting, a promise that even in unfamiliar places, human life pulsed steadily on. By the early morning hours, a faint glow appears beneath shoji doors as dawn lanterns are lit to welcome the day's first visitors. Tea house proprietors, or fishmongers, making their rounds. Before rising, some samurai took a moment to kneel beside their futon in silent meditation, focusing on each breath to transition from dream to duty. Whether these brief practices shaped the famed discipline and focus attributed to Edo's warrior class remains a matter of debate among historians. The futons are then rolled and stowed in osier closets, the cake bouton folded with precision reminiscent of sword sheathing. Tatami mats are brushed again, and rooms regain their daytime simplicity. Outside, the first merchants hawk fresh pickles and rice balls, the scent drifting in like an alarm clock far gentler than any modern ringtone. In this seamless exchange between night and day, you witness how Edo-period Japan wove ceremony, comfort, and communal harmony into the very fabric of sleep, crafting rituals that echo faintly in our own pursuit of rest. You are Pericles, son of Xanthippus, heir to one of Athens' most storied lineages, born into marble halls that echo with your family's triumphs and trials. Before dawn's pale light, you awaken on a simple mattress of goat hair beneath the portico of your family home, the faint glow of oil lamps revealing painted friezes of your ancestors. You roll onto your side, feeling the scratch of woven fibers beneath your fingertips, and recognize that your cradle was not just a bed, but the starting line for destiny. A servant offers you barley porridge sweetened with honey and a sip of watered wine, staples that modern gourmands might sneer at, but that remind you of homegrown virtues. As you lift the coarse spoonful to your lips, its bland warmth grounds you. You recall that Pericles once decreed public funds to feed the poor, ensuring Athenian solidarity. Historians still argue whether that policy was born of genuine compassion or political calculation. After your breakfast, you step into the courtyard, where cool morning air carries the scent of cedar oil from the wrestling grounds. A master hands you a bronze javelin, whose weight is oddly reassuring, like a promise waiting to be kept. You hurl it toward a clay target, the pot shattering with a hollow crack that echoes off columns carved by generations of artisans. Fringe tales claim your childhood coach was a retired mercenary known for lethal accuracy, but evidence remains scattered like pottery shards. And scholars still argue whether mercenary tutors trained elite Athenian youths, or if it is simply embellished gossip. By mid-morning you tire of athletic drills and wander to the peristyle garden, where statues of gods loom among oleander and thyme. The cool stone bench feels smooth beneath your tunic as you trace a finger along a carved inscription praising Pericles' rhetorical skill. You close your eyes and imagine delivering a stirring speech that rallies Athens against her foes. The fragrance of crushed olive leaves drifts on a breeze, mingling with the faint aroma of fish grilling at a nearby stall, a sensory reminder that politics and daily life are inseparable in this city of crowded alleys and open-air assemblies. Soon your tutor arrives with wax tablets and a reed stylus. You practice the elegant curves of Attic script, pressing each letter into the warm wax as if inscribing laws that will shape democratic Athens. You think of Pericles' funeral oration, its cadences still debated in rhetorical schools today. Historians still argue whether his precise words survive, or if later orators polished the speech to perfection. As the sun reaches its zenith, olive branches cast dappled shadows across a low table, piled with olives, cheese, and grilled fish. You bite into a plump olive, its brine exploding across your tongue, and sip wine that tastes of sun-warmed grapes. You recall a fringe rumor that nobles sometimes laced their wine with crushed poppy seeds to soothe debate nerves. Archaeologists still debate whether any remnants of opiates have been found in Athenian pottery. In the afternoon, you don a linen chiton and join your peers for a practice assembly on the Pnyx Hill. Stone benches rise in tiers around a simple speaker's platform, and you feel the rough-hewn rock beneath your cloak. When your turn comes, you step into the open air, heart pounding as if drumming for a battlefield charge rather than a policy debate. You argue passionately for naval expansion, recalling that under Pericles the Athenian fleet grew to 400 ships, a fact that glints like armor in your mind. Yet some critics whisper that this naval build-up bankrupted the treasury, and modern economists still argue whether the Navy's glory tarnished Athens' long-term stability. After the rehearsal, you wander down toward the theatre of Dionysus, where masked actors deliver tragedy under the marble gaze of gods. The air is thick with the aroma of crushed grapes and cedar oil. You settle onto a stone seat, its edge worn smooth by countless audiences, and feel a tremor of anticipation as drums toll. Watching masked performers embody human folly, you ponder how art and politics intertwine. A notion Pericles himself championed when he sponsored construction of the Parthenon, a temple so grand that modern architects still marvel at its proportions. As dusk deepens, you stroll through the agora, lantern light flickering like restless fireflies in clay jars. The chatter of merchants and the clang of forging workshops fade into a hum. You pause by a fountain fed by fresh spring water, cupping your hands to drink. The cool liquid slides down your throat, erasing the day's fatigue. Fringe stories recount that Pericles once mandated public fountains so citizens could access clean water, but some epigraphs suggest these civic projects were more limited than later historians claimed, and scholars still argue over the true extent of his urban reforms. Under a sky studded with stars, you return home. A servant drapes a wool blanket over your shoulders while you bow in silent gratitude before the household shrine. The scent of burning incense, usually frankincense, imported at great expense, lingers in the air, blending with the earthy aroma of stone and citrus trees just beyond the gateway. You lie down on your mattress once more, every curve of the marble beneath softened by cloth and padding. Before sleep claims you, you reflect on the weight of expectation pressing against your chest as surely as the firm mortar beneath your back. Will your vision of Athens endure beyond the flicker of an oil lamp? Or will it vanish like footprints in Attic dust? You inhale deeply, drawing in the night's cool serenity, and as the marble temple of dreams opens, you surrender to its silent embrace, trusting that destiny will carry your name through the ages. You shoulder your way through the throng on Pnyx Hill, the rough stone steps worn smooth by countless sandals. A cool breeze off the Acropolis tickles your neck, carrying echoes of orators past, whose voices once thundered against marble cliff faces. You find your place among citizens perched on tiered benches, the air buzzing with anticipation. Olive branches brush your sleeve, and you catch the scent of laurel wreaths held by veterans relegated to the front row. Historians still argue whether seating at the Pnyx was strictly assigned by status or more fluid, allowing common tradesmen unexpected proximity to power. Before you, rival speakers pace the bema, the wooden platform raised on stone blocks that creaks under each step. You tighten the fold of your chiton, feeling the coarse linen press against your skin like a second thought. The assembly is in session. Proposals for grain, imports clash with calls for rebuilding war. Ravaged docks. You listen to an older statesman extolling maritime might. He reminds you of Pericles himself, who once persuaded the people to fund a fleet of 400 ships. A murmur ripples through the crowd when a young lawyer argues that Athens must temper ambition with frugality, a mainstream fact that underscores your own emerging caution. When your moment arrives, you step onto the bema floor, the wood's grain rough beneath your sandals. A hush blankets the hill, broken only by the distant toll of temple bells. You lift your chin, let your gaze skim over faces marked by hope, frustration, and the occasional chip of sunburn from market days. You begin with measured words, advocating equitable allotments of public funds to support disabled war veterans. The audience leans in, drawn by the sincerity in your tone. Fringe gossip claims that during early speeches, some orators carried hidden oil flasks to moisten their throats. Civic lip balm, if you will. But no artifact has ever confirmed this, and scholars still debate whether such prop flasks existed or are mere rhetorical embellishments. Your voice gains strength as you recall a procession you witnessed that morning. Priests carrying sacred emblems to the Areopagus, their cloaks shimmering with gold thread. You paint that image for the crowd, likening shared sacrifice in war to shared sacrifice in civic duty. The scent of crushed thyme from nearby herb stalls seems to drift upward, as if the hill itself breathes your metaphor back to you. A few listeners nod, and you spot a prominent general tapping a staff in rhythm, a subtle endorsement that sends a thrill through your chest. Mid-speech, a sudden gust rattles the assembly's banners. Long strips of dyed cloth emblazoned with symbols of each tribe. They snap like ancient rally flags, eliciting a ripple of applause. You pause, letting the moment settle before pivoting to practical measures, reallocating silver from tribute, rich islands to ensure stable grain prices. This factual proposal. Pericles famously negotiated similar terms with Chios, resonates with elders who remember empty bread queues of years past. Nevertheless, detractors cry that diverting funds risks angering allies, and modern economists still argue whether Athens' tribute system was a boon that enriched citizens or a blunt instrument of imperial overreach. As you conclude, you gesture toward the city spread below, red-tiled roofs, the white curve of the Odeon roof, and, beyond, the glittering sea. Let us not rest until every Athenian child wakes, knowing their father's sacrifice has meaning. You declare, your voice trailing into the twilight breeze. A roar of approval washes over you, echoing against the low horizon of hills. You step down from the beamer, heart pounding like a war drum, aware that your words have shaped the pulse of the polis. Exiting the assembly, you descend cobbled paths slick with evening dew. Lanterns flicker in alcoves, and the smell of baking flatbreads drifts from a nearby bakery. You cradle a cup of warm wine offered by a sympathizer, its sweetness cutting through the day's dust. Fringe tales suggest that some attendees swilled down diluted wine during sessions to dull political fatigue, an early form of happy hour. But no records confirm this tradition, and historians still argue if excessive libations ever influenced policy outcomes. As you reach the foot of Pnyx, the city's glow softens into clusters of lit windows, each marking a family's end-of-day rituals. Somewhere nearby, a cithara's gentle melody drifts across an open balcony, notes vibrating against stone walls like a lullaby for the awake. You pause to listen, feeling the tension in your shoulders melt away with each chord. Democracy may roar here, but in that moment, art reminds you of shared humanity beyond policy spats. You board a small skiff at the Piraeus-linked inlet carved near Pnyx's base. The wooden oars dip and rise in unison, churning ripples that glitter under lantern light. Each stroke lulls your racing thoughts, and the briny tang of sea breezes cools your flushed cheeks. As the vessel drifts toward the city gates, you recall the subtle gestures of allies made beneath the beamer. Nods, clenched fists, the flash of white teeth in private smiles. You wonder which alliances will hold when true tests come. Stepping onto the marble causeway, you feel the firm stones underfoot, a tangible reminder that Athens' foundations are born of both vision and labour. You tuck the beamer's memory into your heart, confident it will serve you in assemblies to come. A stray dog trots alongside, its quiet panting a grounding counterpoint to the evening's fervour. You reach your home portico, where lanterns swing gently in the breeze, and you breathe in the mingled scents of sea salt, olive oil, and wet stone. Laying aside your cloak, you trace your fingers over the carved relief of an owl perched on a lyre. Athena's symbol watched over your debate, and you feel her presence in every echo. You light a final oil lamp, its flame steady and sure, and pour a small libation of wine at the doorstep shrine. The scent of frankincense rises in a curling ribbon, and you whisper a silent vow to guard Athens' future. You slip onto your mattress of layered goat hair and wool, the fibres cool beneath your cheek. Through the open portico, you glimpse the moon's reflection dancing on the sea's surface, a silver promise that tomorrow's assembly awaits. You close your eyes, the hillside's roar replaced by the soft beating of your own heart, and drift towards sleep, preparing for debates yet to unfold. You stand on the prow of the trireme as it cuts through the morning mist, the wooden hull groaning beneath your sandals. Behind you, a row of bronze-clad rowers grips their oars, muscles rippling like taut cables with every synchronized pull. The Aegean salt air stings your lungs, mingling with the acrid smoke from burning tar used to seal the vessel's seams. This is the moment when Athens' fate hinges. War has erupted against Sparta's allies, and you command the fleet dispatched to defend the city's maritime empire. By custom, you wear a simple linen chiton stained from earlier drills, tied at the waist with a leather girdle. A bronze breastplate lies off to the side, waiting for the ritual lacing of straps that transforms a scholar into a general. You slip it on, the cold metal pressing into your chest like a reminder that rhetoric only travels so far without force behind it. Historians still argue whether Pericles believed in aggressive naval strikes from the outset, or merely sought to protect grain routes flowing into Piraeus. A sudden cry rings out and flags snap overhead. The signal for departure. A single trumpet note repeated twice. You raise an arm, feeling the bristles of your braided hair tickle the back of your neck. Around you, sailors shout commands, voices rough as sandpaper rasping against wind. One grizzled helmsman curses under his breath about sea serpents and bad portents. Fringe rumours once held that a bronze statue of Poseidon wept tears of rust before battles, though no one recalls seeing such tears. Scholars still argue whether seafaring superstitions influenced tactical decisions or simply kept rowers awake during long watches. As the ship glides through a flock of terns swirling overhead, you peer toward the horizon where Sparta's vessels lie in wait. Their oars sit idle, silhouettes like dark fish just beneath the water's surface. You taste adrenaline on your tongue, a metallic tang that modern warriors might mask with chewing herbs. You remind yourself that in 431 they first clashed at Sybota, an indecisive skirmish that nonetheless served as the spark for open hostilities and the beginning of your heavy burden. Orders crack like whip snaps. Form battle line. You bark the command, relishing the sensation of authority cracking through salty air. The rowers respond, the ship's stern swinging wide as the oar blades carve angled arcs in the sea. You note the wary glances of enemy crews as they mirror your maneuvers. Their panicked confusion resembles that of shoppers shuffling in a crowded market when a pickpocket has been spotted. Chaotic energy with tension lodged in every glance. You seize the moment to shout tactical adjustments. Your voice carries over the din of clattering oars and creaking wood. You recall Pericles' strategy to leverage Athens' naval superiority rather than face Spartan hoplites on land. This mainstream plan reflects Athens' strengths in maritime warfare and your own faith in its logical clarity. Yet some critics grouse that relying so heavily on the navy invited Sparta to raid Attican countryside unchecked, sowing fear among landbound peasants. Modern historians still argue whether a more balanced strategy could have spared the fields and vineyards from Spartan torchlight. As hulls align, you watch a Corinthian ship veer off course, its helmsman thrown off balance by a swell. You see that the momentary lapse, ordering your trireme closer to shield the stricken ally. In tight formations, ships become shields for one another. An aquatic phalanx, where a single breach can topple a vessel. You detect a whiff of tar and brine in the air, a scent that clings to your hair hours after docking. It reminds you that victory here depends on discipline and cohesion, qualities you drilled into your crews at dawn. The signal to ram sounds 3 trumpet blasts in rapid succession. You tense, gripping the rail as the trireme surges forward. Each wave hits the hull with a muffled thud, vibrations resonating through your feet. The prow strikes the foe amidships, splintering timber and sending searing splashes of seawater into the air. You hear the crack of oars and the panicked shouts of enemy rowers as they scramble to bail water. In that moment you feel both exhilaration and unease. The grim satisfaction of a blow struck and the knowledge that war's true horror rides on every cresting wave. After the impact, you issue orders to board. You leap onto the enemy deck, sandaled feet slapping wet wood. The clash of bronze armor rings against rusted spearheads as combatants close ranks. You press forward, shield raised, your breath rasping like a bellows. The tang of blood and sweat fills your nostrils, though you cannot tell them apart. A crazed soldier thrusts at your midsection. You parry and drive him back into the waves. In the frenzy, you catch sight of the Corinthian allies scrambling aboard your trireme, alive but shattered by fear. You wonder if this victory was worth the grim tableau unfolding before you. When the dust settles and enemy vessels drift adrift, you sound the recall. The surviving ships converge to form a circle, then break ranks to ferry wounded home. You linger on deck, staring at the horizon's fading pink fire, and taste salt on your lips that tastes nothing like tears but stings just as sharply. Historians still argue whether these early naval victories inspired overconfidence that later led to strategic blunders. Night falls before your fleet returns to Piraeus, and torches flicker like restless spirits along the docks. You step onto solid ground, the uneven cobblestones greeting your sandals with bruised indifference. A quartermaster thrusts a flask of wine into your hand. You raise it to your lips, the liquid dark as ink and sweet with pressed grapes. You drink deeply, savouring the relief that comes when steel is stowed and adrenaline ebbs. Fringe accounts claim you once ordered barrels of wine to be dumped over victorious triremes, so sailors felt they bathed in Dionysian blessing, though no amphora excavated has borne such remnants. Scholars still argue whether these celebratory rituals ever occurred, or belong solely to spirited tavern tales. You make your way through Piraeus, the clamorous medieval-esque markets now closed and silent, save for the distant squawk of a cormorant perched on a cargo mast. The stench of fish and sewage mingles with the drifting smoke of early night fires as dock workers stow away battered shields and tar buckets. You pause by a small shrine dedicated to Poseidon, his trident carved from ivory and bronze. You offer a hushed prayer of thanks for safe passage and murmur a promise to allocate funds for more fleets. Always more fleets. As you tread the narrow street back toward your home on the Acropolis's slopes, the wind brings the scent of olive groves beyond the city gates. Each exhale releases tension coiled in your shoulders since dawn. Shadows stretch long between temple columns, and an owl hoots from beneath a ledge. You press on, the weight of command heavy in your chest like the unyielding breastplate you removed hours before. Reaching your chambers, you shed armor and cloak, letting the linen chiton fall like water to the floor. You collapse onto a mattress of layered goat hair, the fibers softening each ache. You gaze upward, at a painted ceiling, depicting Athena's victory over giants. The fresco's faded pigments form a comforting mosaic of coaxed triumphs and tacit warnings. You close your eyes, recalling the feel of wood splintering, the smell of brine and tar, the echo of trumpets in the dawn. As sleep sweeps over you, you wonder how many more dawns you will command before your name is carved into history, or swallowed by the abyss of forgotten battles. You step onto the scaffolded slopes of the Acropolis as dawn's first light gilds the Parthenon's columns in pale gold. The air is crisp with the scent of fresh lime plaster and stone dust. Beneath your sandals, wooden planks creak with every measured stride, carrying you through a labyrinth of scaffolding where stonemasons chant rhythmic strikes of chisels against marble blocks. You feel the pulse of creation beneath your feet, a living monument rising at your command. Around you, workmen balance on narrow beams, wearing simple linen chitons and leather sandals. Their muscles glisten with perspiration as they chip away at marble reliefs destined to depict triumphant processions and gods astride chariots. You inhale deeply, tasting the faint tang of crushed limestone mixed with the heady aroma of fresh pine beams imported from Mount Hymettus. This tactile symphony reminds you that under your leadership, Athens embarked on the most ambitious building program in history. You pause before a partially carved metope, illustrating the battle between lapiths and centaurs. A master sculptor runs his hand over the rough surface and explains that the figures must convey both strength and serenity in equal measure. You nod, recalling that Phidias designed these sculptures under your supervision. A fringe rumour persists that some of the ivory and gold adorning Athena's statue were pilfered from conquered cities, though no ledger confirms it, and historians still argue whether such lavish decorations represented piety or political propaganda. As you ascend higher, you encounter the Parthenon's interior, where ebony and ivory panels gleam behind wooden screens. Craftsmen polish gold leaf onto a massive statue of Athena, her spear angled toward the sky, as if urging the city forward. You brush your fingertip against a cool patch of leaf, feeling its delicate texture and marveling at the artisan's skill. You recall that this statue stood over 12 meters tall, a mainstream historical fact that filled visitors with awe. The scent of warm beeswax used to seal the gold mingles with the earthy perfume of olive oil lamps rhythmically burning around the chamber. Below, workmen haul massive marble drums up inclined ramps, their rhythmic grunt a bass line to the clang of hammers. You walk to the edge and peer down at the propylaea gates in progress, their Doric columns rising like silent sentinels. You breathe in the scent of wet earth where foundations were recently set and the crisp whisper of marble dust stirring in the breeze. You imagine the day crowds will stream through this grand entrance, feeling humility and pride in equal measure. Scholars still argue whether the Propylaea's eastern wing was meant for a painting gallery or simply a covered walkway, leaving its original function a matter of debate. At midday, you sit on a worn marble block to share a modest meal of dried figs and barley cakes. You chew thoughtfully, the sweetness of figs lingering on your tongue like a fleeting promise. A neighbouring architect breaks open a small flask of water from the clepsydra spring. The cool liquid soothes your parched throat, reminding you that even the grandest endeavours hinge on simple comforts. Fringe whispers mention that famed playwrights like Sophocles once dined on these same snacks while drafting lines for tragedians, though evidence remains anecdotal, and historians still argue whether creative genius thrives on modest provisions or luxurious feasts. Refreshed, you continue to the Erechtheion, where columns twine like ancient trees and caryatids stand poised as living supports. The scent of crushed wild thyme swirling among the stones drifts upward. You run your hand along the fluted shaft of a caryatid's column, marvelling at how each groove catches light differently as clouds drift overhead. You envision Athenians pausing here to whisper prayers to Poseidon and Athena, believing these figures bore the city's burdens in silent strength. Modern archaeologists still argue whether these feminine forms were inspired by Persian prototypes or purely evolved from Greek ingenuity. Descending to the temple of Hephaestus, you observe blacksmiths, forging bronze details under bellows-pumped fires. Sparks dance like fireflies around an anvil ringed with tools. The hot metal smell is sharp and metallic, contrasting with the cooler stone aromas above. You nod approvingly as a smith fits intricately decorated bronze palmettes to a frieze piece. Pericles funded this temple after victories in earlier conflicts, a mainstream historical note that reminds you how art and power entwine. Yet a fringe theory claims that some bronze came from melted down enemy weapons looted at Marathon, a claim unsubstantiated and still argued by historians. You turn toward the city spread below, red-tiled roofs clustered around olive groves that shimmer in midday heat. The hum of daily life drifts upward, merchants calling out in the agora, the clang of potters' wheels, and children's laughter echoing off narrow alleys. You recall commissioning festivals like the Panathenaea to display newly finished sculptures in elaborate processions, a spectacle that bound art, religion, and civic identity. You taste honeyed wine on your lips as you imagine the crowds weaving through these landmarks, their awe tied to your vision and leadership. As afternoon wanes, you visit the foundations of the new Odeon of Pericles where timbers await assembly. You feel the smooth grain of pine beams as you trace their length. The scent of fresh sap mingles with sawdust, a woodsy counterpoint to marble's chalky aroma. You issue precise instructions to carpenters on beam placement and stage layout, ensuring acoustics that will carry music and poetry to every corner. Fringe legends suggest that hidden resonators beneath the wooden floor amplified sound, though no remnants of such devices have surfaced, and scholars still argue whether the Odeon featured any such acoustic marvels. Before twilight, you pause atop the Acropolis plateau to watch the sun's final rays illuminate your city, a vast tapestry of white and terracotta woven between hills and sea. The wind whispers through olive branches, carrying the distant cadence of water from the Panathenaic procession's sacred stretch. You close your eyes and breathe deeply, feeling the weight of both creation and expectation settle around you. Under your guidance, Athens will inspire generations, yet you know that time erodes even marble and memory. You descend the final stair, the temperature dropping enough to brush goosebumps across your arms. Lanterns glow along the Peripatos path, as craftsmen extinguish their lamps and roll away tools. You smell the evening scent of roasting chestnuts from a street vendor near the Areopagus. The aroma mingles with cold stone and a hint of smoked fish from family dinners preparing under humble rooftops. Reaching your home portico, you pause before a sculpted relief of Athena Parthenos, its features softened by flickering lamplight. You whisper a silent vow to protect this city of art and democracy, to ensure every stone laid and every column carved honors its people. You bow slightly, then step inside, feeling the cool air shift to the warmer embrace of hearth and family. You remove your dust-covered himation and drape it over a peg, the fabric's fibers releasing trapped stone flecks that drift like dust motes in the lamp glow. You pour a small libation of wine at the household shrine, the aroma rich with fermented grapes. The flickering flame casts dancing shadows over painted walls depicting myths of gods and heroes. You slip onto a simple couch of wool blankets laid on a raised dais. You lay your head on a small pillow stuffed with olive husks, its scent earthy and faintly nutty. As your eyelids grow heavy, you feel the weight of every carved marble block, every chiseled relief, and every hammered bronze fitting settle into your bones. You ponder whether your monuments will survive wars and whims of future generations, or crumble unnoticed. Historians still argue whether the legacy of Pericles will endure as symbol of golden age or fade like footprints in attic dust. You close your eyes. The final image, a silent acropolis bathed in silver moonlight. The echo of chisels has ceased for the night, and in place of industry, there is gentle quiet. You inhale one last breath of stone and olive husks, then drift into sleep, your dreams built upon the very monuments you raised. You wake to an eerie hush shrouding the city, the familiar chorus of merchants and street criers replaced by distant groans and muted prayers. A pall of smoke rises from makeshift pyres beyond the city walls, where bodies are laid out on hurriedly constructed funeral pyres. The acrid scent of burning flesh mingles with the tang of overripe olives left to rot in empty stalls. You clutch your chest, feeling both physical weariness and the leaden weight of fear settling in your gut. Historians still argue whether the plague first struck in the crowded Piraeus docks or filtered through grain shipments from Egypt, but its arrival feels as inevitable as sunrise. You summon your closest advisors to the Stoa, where marble columns stand sentinel over a sea of worried faces. They report that coffers meant for grand projects are nearly empty, diverted instead to buy wood and fuel for the pyres. You taste the bitter irony. The same silver that once funded the Parthenon now feeds the flames consuming your city's soul. A fringe account tells of priests waterlogging the Parthenon's foundations in a desperate attempt to douse contagion, though no records confirm such waterlogged sanctuaries, and scholars still argue whether any ritual could stem an invisible enemy. Drawing a shaky breath, you stride through the deserted agora, picking your way past overturned stools and scattering pigeons. The usual market scents, fresh bread, cured fish, spilled olive oil, have curdled into reminders of abundance turned to ash. You pause before a shattered amphora, its mosaic shards glittering like spilled memories in the sun. You remember Pericles addressing a packed assembly just weeks ago, urging unity and confidence in Athens' future. Now, that same confidence tastes like ash on your tongue. You make your way to the Pnyx, where the speaker's platform stands empty beneath the hot midday sun. No assembly gathers here. Civic life has paused in collective agony. Instead, you gather a small circle of physicians and philosophers, their faces gaunt beneath grimy chiton sleeves. One physician hands you a cup of watered wine, infused with willow bark, believed to ease fever. You sip it reluctantly, the woodsy bitterness clawing at your throat. Modern pharmacologists note that willow bark contains salicylates, a precursor to aspirin, yet its efficacy against plague would have been negligible. Historians still argue whether ancient remedies offered any relief or simply provided psychological comfort. As twilight deepens, you return to the Stoa's chambers, where leaden lamplight reveals maps dotted with red marks, homes where death has struck most fiercely. You trace your finger along each dot, recalling the names of friends and allies lost to the pestilence. You pause at one marked Ariphron, the wealthy patron who funded your earliest festivals. A hollow ache swells in your chest, and you realize that your campaigns and orations have brought little relief to these suffering citizens. Outside, the sound of distant chanting drifts through open doorways. You follow it to a small sanctuary where ritualists sprinkle barley grains at thresholds, believing the humble grain will absorb disease. Fringe lore claims that some households climbed onto rooftops to shout curses at the sky, demanding the gods return the plague to its sender. Scholars still argue whether such frantic rituals offered spiritual solace or merely compounded the city's terror. Night falls with unusual swiftness, and you retire to your private chambers overlooking the Aegean. A solitary oil lamp flickers on a low table, illuminating a clay bust of your likeness crafted in better times. You gaze at your own features, the strong jaw, the pointed beard, the resolute gaze, and wonder if history will remember the man beneath the myth. Will future orators cite your funeral oration as the pinnacle of civic rhetoric, or dismiss it as the hollow words of a proud leader undone by fate? You unlace your sandals and pad to the balcony, where the humid night air brushes your skin like a damp cloak. Below, the scent of smouldering wood and charred olive groves drifts upward. You inhale deeply, tasting ash and salt on the breeze. Somewhere, a lute's faint melody drifts across alleys, a lonely attempt at beauty in a world gone mad. You lean on the balcony rail, marble cool against your palm, and whisper a silent plea to Athena for mercy. Turning inward, you settle onto your mattress of layered goat hair and linen, its familiar contours offering scant comfort. You rest your head on a pillow stuffed with olive husks, the scent faintly nutty yet overshadowed by the pervasive aroma of decay. As you close your eyes, memories flicker behind your lids. Triumphal processions on the Panathenaic Way, the gleam of marble under midday sun, the roar of approval echoing off Pnyx's stones. A cough rumbles in your chest, dry, insistent, mocking. You press a hand to your mouth, feeling warmth seep through your palm. You steel yourself against panic and recall the words you once spoke. Time is the forge that tempers greatness. Time now seems a cruel smith, hammering you with blows you cannot parry. You wonder how many more dawns you will witness before the forge's fire claims you too. In the stillness before sleep, you conjure visions of Athens rising from ashes. You see new fleets sliding into harbours, fresh sculptures carving shadows along temple steps, children gathering olive branches for future festivals. You hold on to that image as tightly as you can, a talisman against despair. Historians still argue whether your final measures, closing public spaces, banning funerals, urging private burials, saved any lives, or merely delayed the city's mortality. Your breath slows, and the lamp's flame guttering casts dancing shadows that mimic columns swaying in an invisible wind. You feel the weight of legacy pressing down, heavier than any cuirass you ever wore. You ponder if your monuments will endure plague, war, and perishable human memory, or collapse like houses of clay at the slightest tremor. At last, weariness claims you. You drift beyond fear, beyond coughing fits and memories of triumph and loss. In your final thoughts, you conjure the image of Athena's silent statue, spear and shield gleaming beneath a starlit sky. You imagine her gaze resting upon the city you built, forgiving and proud. And as darkness enfolds you, you whisper, "May my name stand as steadfast as these stones," before slipping into the silent embrace of sleep. By the banks of the Nile, Khufu's decree echoed through the palace corridors, summoning priests, architects, and governors to lay the groundwork for a monument to rival the sun itself. In the cool, incense-filled halls of the royal residence, priests of Ra and Thoth assembled beneath painted beams depicting celestial boats. They examined star charts, tracing lines between Kochab and Mizar to divine the pyramid's correct orientation. Mainstream records confirm that Khufu reigned during Egypt's 4th dynasty and ordered the Great Pyramid's construction around 2580 BCE, a project that would span roughly 20 years under his unyielding vision. In a sunken inner chamber, the pharaoh met with his chief architect, Hemiunu, allegedly his half-brother. Together they unrolled a papyrus scroll illustrating a perfect square aligned to the 4 cardinal points. Hemiunu demonstrated the skewer and plumb-line surveying technique, planting wooden stakes and suspending weighted cords at dusk to sight true north by starlight. Historians still argue whether this method yielded orientation precise within a fraction of a degree, or if later restorations obscured minor original errors. Nearby, the master stonemason Mentu oversaw the marking out of the plateau's foundations. Trenches were dug and filled with Nile floodwaters, creating level baselines tested with wooden A-frames. Modern archaeological experiments confirm this simple yet effective leveling method, demonstrating that even without laser tools, the builders achieved remarkable flatness. Fringe accounts whisper that Mentu performed nightly rituals over the flooded trenches, sprinkling natron into the water to bless each reference line, though no material trace supports these stories, and scholars still debate whether ritual played any practical role. Meanwhile, regional governors received sealed orders carried by camel caravans to dispatch grain, beer, and labour from every nome across Egypt. Fields once sown with barley and emmer lay fallow as workers converged on Giza. Some fringe theories claim that prisoners of war were pressed into service, but contemporary inscriptions acknowledge a workforce compensated with rations and housing, suggesting a paid labour force rather than an enslaved population. Historians still argue over the precise social status of the pyramid builders and the extent of voluntary versus coerced labour. As dawn broke on the first grand ceremony, Khufu, draped in linen dyed the colour of sunrise, laid the foundation offering. He poured beer and scattered grapes into a pit at the northeast corner, touching the levelled ground with a golden staff. Priests intoned hymns to Horus, invoking divine guardianship over every stone to follow. Fringe lore even suggests salted cat meat was included in the offering, believed to transfer feline agility to the structure. Yet culinary historians dismiss any mystical benefit, and note only that its pungent smell might have driven away scavenging birds. Simultaneously, envoys returned with news from the Tura and local quarries. Limestone blocks, each roughly 1 cubit square and weighing about 2.5 tons, awaited transport. Craftsmen had already begun chiseling quarry faces using dolerite pounders and copper tools to rough-shape blocks. These draft blocks would soon be smoothed by copper chisels before being slid onto wooden sledges bound with marsh-grown hemp ropes. Mainstream evidence indicates that water was poured beneath the sledges to reduce friction, a technique confirmed by modern recreations to cut hauling effort by almost half. Historians still debate whether this method was discovered by accident or carefully refined over generations of temple building. Work gangs assembled at the riverbank when the annual inundation raised water levels. Cedar barges from Byblos, each carrying up to 4 heavy blocks, threaded their way through rising currents. Boatmen timed their departures to coincide with peak flood flow, while overseers directed unceremonious chants and rhythmic flails to keep crews in step. Fringe stories claim incense was burned on the barges to sanctify the cargo, though no traces have been found in excavated harbour sediments, and scholars still argue whether such rituals were common or merely anecdotal. At Giza, the blocks were unloaded onto gently sloping earthen ramps, engineered to maintain a consistent gradient. Ramp builders layered sand, gravel, and broken pottery shards in compacted courses, widening the pathway as the pyramid rose. Excavations have revealed traces of rammed earth cores over 20 metres wide, though debate continues over the ramp's exact configuration, straight, zigzag, or spiralled, since no conclusive structural remnants survive. Throughout that inaugural season, the plateau thrummed with activity. The rhythmic pounding of dolerite on limestone, the creak of wooden sledges, and the calls of overseers blended into a constant mechanical hum. Dust rose in golden clouds, drifting over the river like incense at dusk. Workers' tunics, dyed in various hues of red and blue, became stained with ochre and sand, a wearable testament to their participation in this grand divine experiment. By the end of the first year, the pyramid's 4 corners had risen several meters above the plateau, their edges sharp against the sky. At night, Hemiunu conducted torchlit inspections, using plumb bobs to verify verticality and priests to sprinkle consecrated water along each joint to ward off malevolent spirits. Modern structural engineers still debate whether moisture could protect fresh mortar or introduce long-term risks, illustrating how technical decisions and spiritual beliefs intertwined in ancient Egypt's greatest architectural endeavour. Thus commenced a decade of ceaseless toil under solar and celestial oversight. Khufu's divine mandate rallied a nation, intertwining religious conviction with architectural ambition, forging a legacy that would challenge future generations to surpass its scale and precision. In that desert crucible, human determination and sacred authority converged to lay the foundations of one of history's most enduring monuments. At dawn's first light, the pale cliffs of the Tura quarries gleam like a field of bleached bones, their smooth surfaces interrupted by seams of dolerite drill holes and jagged scars where blocks have been freed. Here, skilled stonemasons, led by Foreman Merry, uncoil coils of hemp rope and heft heavy dolerite pounders, as the desert wind carries the faint aroma of hot rock and sun-baked sand. Mainstream archaeological studies confirm that Tura limestone, prized for its fine grain and near-white appearance, supplied the casing stones that once cloaked the Great Pyramid in a brilliant sheen visible for miles. You watch as Mary's crew drives wooden wedges into shallow grooves cut by copper chisels. They pour water into each groove, causing the wood to swell and split the limestone along natural fault lines. A sharp crack echoes off the quarry walls, and a cubit-thick block loosens with a subtle shift, like a reluctant giant releasing its grip on the earth. Fringe tales preserved in local folklore recount that some quarry workers chanted hymns to Hathor, goddess of miners, believing that earnest song would coax the stone to yield more willingly. Scholars still argue whether such musical accompaniment was widespread, or merely the fancy of later storytellers seeking poetic flair. Once a block dislodges, its face bears the rough texture of dolerite impact marks. Copper chisels are then used to trim uneven surfaces, creating parallel faces to within a finger's breadth of tolerance. Masters test the flatness by running a length of reed along the surface, watching for telltale gaps where the reed springs away. This simple tool exemplifies the precision achieved without modern straightedges or levels. Historians still argue whether the builders possessed specialized wooden templates or relied solely on reed and eye to ensure consistent dimensions. With the block smoothed, teams of 10 men slip it onto a wooden sledge carved from sturdy acacia. The runners have been gouged and planed until they slide over sand with minimal resistance. Before each haul, overseers sprinkle a thin layer of water across the sand in front of the sledge runners. Recent experimental archaeology has demonstrated that this technique can halve the force required to move heavy loads, reducing friction by creating a lubricating film between wood and sand. Whether ancient engineers discovered this effect through trial and error or divine inspiration remains a point of debate among specialists. As the sledge inches forward, 30 additional labourers place their bodies against its rear, heaving in unison to the rhythmic beat of Mary's wooden staff tapping the ground. The sound echoes through the quarry, mingling with the din of pounding tools and shouted commands. The sand shifts underfoot, fine grains catching in every crease of tunics and embroidered hems. You can almost taste the grit on your lips as sweat stings your eyes, a constant reminder of the human cost behind each polished block. Once the blocks reach the riverbank, where the Nile's seasonal flood has raised water levels enough to embrace the quays, they are hoisted onto cedar barges, imported from far-off Byblos. Skilled boatmen navigate the muddy waters, balancing atop gently rocking planks as they secure each load with hemp lashings. The air here smells of wet papyrus and river silt, a heady contrast to the dry quarry. Mainstream records note that these barges carried up to 4 of the heftiest casing stones apiece, their deep hulls barely touching the water's surface under such weight. From Tura, the flotillas drift downriver to Giza. You pass villages of mud brick houses and clusters of date palms whose fronds whisper against the boat's gunwales. Children dip their toes in the river, giggling as they avoid trailing ropes, while waterfowl lift off in startled flocks. Fringe accounts suggest that certain captains loaded their barges at night by torchlight to evade tax collectors, a clandestine practice that modern papyrus fragments hint at but never fully confirm. Scholars still argue whether nighttime shipments were common risk-taking ventures or merely the stuff of adventurous anecdotes. At Giza's edge, the landing point is a bustling nexus of activity. Wooden cranes, rudimentary yet ingenious, stand ready with levered beams and counterweights fashioned from pottery shards filled with sand. They lift the blocks from barge decks onto staging platforms where stonemasons apply finishing touches. The scent of warmed limestone drifts on gusts of wind, mingling with the sharp tang of copper and the earthy odour of oiled ropes. You feel a rough block's cool edge against your palm, marvelling at its smoothness despite the arduous journey. Below the staging area, colossal earthen ramps spiral upward, their sides reinforced with packed clay and crushed pottery. Teams of workers haul the sledges up these ramps, using ropes looped around wooden capstans, turning the winding posts like great windlasses. Each revolution pulls tons of stone a few inches closer to the growing face of the pyramid. Fringe lore credits certain ramp crews with singing bawdy sea shanties borrowed from Nile sailors to keep spirits high, an amusing parallel to modern construction sites. But scant evidence confirms these. Lyrical attachments, and historians still argue whether such songs formed part of daily toil. The ramps themselves are marvels of practical engineering. Excavations reveal cross-sections, showing layered courses of sand, gravel, and ceramic debris compacted under foot traffic. This composite structure prevented slippage and ensured drainage during rare desert rains. Engineers debate whether ramps were rebuilt in successive stages around the pyramid's core, or if a single massive ramp sufficed for the entire height, even as some nascent spiral designs would later appear at subsequent pyramids. As blocks ascend, stone carvers stationed at intermediate platforms adjust each block to its precise course height. They chip away any slight overhangs and mark alignment lines with red ochre, ensuring that each layer of casing stones will form a continuous, reflective surface. The wind here whistles down the ramp, carrying swirling dust motes that catch the sunlight like tiny embers. You feel the sting of grit in your nostrils and the constant heat of the sun beating down through the open air. At last, each stone arrives at its assigned row, where a dedicated crew channels it into place using levered wooden beams and padded wooden rollers. The block shifts with a creaking protest before settling into its mortise with satisfying solidity. Surrounding workers inspect its joints, running fingers along seams and marking any imperfections for later correction. Fringe theories propose that hidden metal dowels once held blocks together, recalling the bronze pins used in later Hellenistic monuments. But no such artifacts have been unearthed, and scholars still argue whether metal fastenings played any role in pyramid construction. By midday, the site hums with coordinated activity. Ox-driven carts ferry more supplies of tools, ropes, and foodstuffs up earthen aisles carved between ramp levels. The smell of flatbreads baking in temporary ovens drifts across the ramp terraces, offering workers a momentary reprieve. Children born in nearby labor camps deliver baskets of dates and fresh water, darting between legs like desert sprites. You notice how the interplay of practical necessity and communal support echoes through every movement, a testament to a society that wove rest and ritual into its toil. As the sun dips low, long shadows of half-set stones stretch across the plateau. Nightfall brings a hush, broken only by the distant clatter of a lone barge returning empty to Tura and the low chant of a night watchman patrolling ramp edges. You breathe deeply, inhaling the cool mingling scents of damp riverbank and drying clay. The ramps lie silent, awaiting another dawn when the same dance of human strength and ingenuity will resume, stretching stone from river to sky in service of Khufu's immortal vision. Under a vault of desert sky splashed with stars, the architect's workshop hums with quiet urgency. Wooden tables groan beneath meticulously unrolled papyrus scrolls, their surfaces covered in reed-ink diagrams of angles and dimensions. Oil lamps burn with a pale, steady glow, casting dancing shadows across the ochre-stained walls. This is where Hemiunu and his chief surveyors perform their midnight calculations, ensuring that each face of the pyramid will rise true to celestial alignment. At the center of the workshop stands a stone plinth topped with an ebony star chart, etched with constellations like Orion, the Great Bear, and the Dog Star. Surveyors align the chart by sighting through bronze sighting tubes calibrated to magnify distant points of light. Mainstream evidence confirms that the Great Pyramid's sides align within a fraction of a degree to the cardinal points, an achievement rivaled by modern instruments only millennia later. Historians still argue whether this precision was the result of rigorous astronomical observation or remarkably accurate calculation based on geometric principles alone. Nearby, a plastered model of the pyramid's base sits on a large wooden board. Thin cords stretch from each corner, meeting at a central ring where a weighted plumb bob hangs. By ensuring all 4 cords converge perfectly over the ring, the team verifies that the base square is level to within millimeters. Fringe accounts suggest that Hemiunu once invited a group of priest astrologers to chant hymns to the deity Thoth, patron of writing and mathematics, hoping divine favor would refine his instruments' accuracy. No contemporary record mentions these nocturnal rites, and scholars still debate whether ritual played any meaningful role or served simply to bolster the architect's confidence. Along one wall, a series of wooden A-frames supports lengths of palm wood rods carved with graduations marking cubits and palms. These rods are used to measure scaled-down model blocks, ensuring that each real block will match dimensions when multiplied by the proper ratio. The rods have been smoothed by constant handling, their edges rounded by palm oil applied each morning to prevent warping in the dry desert air. Modern researchers still argue whether ancient builders relied more on such physical tools or on mental arithmetic passed down through master-apprentice lineages. At a low bench, apprentices mix fine sand with water to create a precise mortar sample. They test its consistency by dropping small clay spheres into the mixture and timing how long it takes to sink. This simple experiment informs the ratio of gypsum to lime needed for full-strength mortar, critical for the pyramid's core stability. Fringe theories propose that tribal smiths once added a handful of powdered lapis lazuli to the mix, believing its celestial blue would anchor the structure under Orion's watch. Laboratory analysis has found no trace of lapis in any mortar samples, and experts still argue whether exotic additives were ever more than fanciful rumour. Toward the back of the workshop, Hemiunu confers with a star knowledge specialist, watching as he adjusts the position of a polished obsidian mirror. By tilting the mirror to catch starlight, the specialist projects constellations onto the workshop ceiling, marking their positions with chalk. These chalk marks guide adjustments to the base's orientation and help calculate the pyramid's slope angle, approximately 51 degrees, a mainstream figure recorded on later Greek manuscripts. Historians still argue whether this precise angle was chosen for structural stability, symbolic significance, or simply the pleasing effect it casts as sunlight plays across the casing stones. As midnight deepens into the small hours, the air grows cooler, and the scent of jasmine oil, applied to keep ink pens supple, wafts through the room. Scribes dip reed brushes into pigmented inks made from galena and ochre, scripting not only dimensions but also marginal notes. Align axis at dawn, or check northern star sighting. These notes are later compiled into durable cedarwood notebooks, their pages glued with boiled fish gelatin to resist the desert's dryness. Fringe whispers claim that one such notebook was enchanted with spells to protect its contents from sandstorms, an unsubstantiated tale that even Egypt's most ardent antiquarians approach with skepticism, and scholars still debate whether any protective incantations appeared in practical architectural texts. On a raised dais, a circular platform holds a wooden sundial calibrated to local latitude. As the hour hand's shadow crosses carved hour lines, surveyors calibrate their plumb bobs and sighting tubes, cross-referencing time with star positions. This synchronization ensures that lunar and solar cycles both inform construction phases, tying the pyramid's geometry to celestial rhythms. Modern archaeoastronomers still argue how integral such timekeeping was to the builders, given the absence of mechanical clocks or standardized time zones. Periodically, a messenger slips through the workshop door bearing fresh drafts of papyrus bearing administrative orders. Increase ramp gradient by half cubit. Redirect Tura casing to west face, or extend water trench by 10 cubits for base survey. These orders reflect both dynamic adaptation to field conditions and the pyramid's tight link between theory and practice. Fringe theories speculate that some orders were scribbled in hieratic code so that only initiates could read them, preserving trade secrets, but archivists note no surviving examples of encoded construction directives, and historians still argue whether any such secrecy ever existed. In the hush before dawn, the master surveyor steps outside to re-establish sightlines. He kneels on cooled limestone, planting a tall pole perfectly vertical and sighting along its edge toward two distant markers previously set on the horizon. The wind carries the faint roar of river ferries returning stone, a reminder that the workshop's calculations underpin ceaseless field toil. Back inside, Hemiunu reviews final sketches, nodding as satisfied craftsmen roll the model away for another night's rest. As stars fade before the eastern glow, the team makes note of a novel observation, a slight irregularity in the northern baseline. By calculating a minor correction, a shift of 2 digits west, they avoid a potential cumulative error that could skew the entire face alignment. This last-minute adjustment illustrates the marriage of empirical observation and mathematical precision that defined the pyramid's construction. Modern engineers still argue whether similar corrections occurred unnoticed at other stages or if such meticulous oversight was unique to the foundation phase. With the sky turning pale, apprentices begin rolling up papyrus scrolls and stowing tools. The scent of jasmine oil lingers, mingled with cool stone and a faint metallic trace from the bronze instruments. Lamps gutter but remain lit until the first workers arrive from the camps, ready to implement the night's finalized plans. Thus, as desert dawn breaks, the pyramid's geometry stands not merely on sand but on hours of diligent calculations, celestial guidance, and the unwavering conviction that Khufu's eternal monument will ascend true to both earth and sky. You arrive at the huge earthen ramps coiling around the growing pyramid like sleepy serpents curled in sand. From this vantage, you see thousands of workers, stonemasons, haulers, and supervisors, moving in concert, each task synchronized with a low chant that rises and falls, like the breath of the desert itself. The ramps extend from the riverbank to several tiers up the pyramid's face, providing a gently sloping path for sledges bearing cut limestone. Mainstream archaeological evidence suggests these ramps reached widths of 20 meters or more, reinforced with packed gravel and pottery shards to prevent slipping under heavy loads. At the base, teams of 10 men brace against a rope tied to a massive sledge carrying 2 casing stones. The runners scrape across wind-wetted sand, slicked by overseers pouring water ahead of each pull. You can feel the heat radiating off the ramp's surface, mingling with the cool spray of irrigation water, creating a heavy steam that clings to your skin. As the workers heave in unison, an overseer taps a wooden staff to mark rhythm. Fringe tales whisper that some overseers blew whistles carved from reed to signal shifts, an innovation never confirmed by excavated artifacts, and historians still argue whether such auditory cues complemented or replaced staff tapping. Mid-ramp, a scatter of small shelter tents, offers shade and midday rest. Here, labourers share simple meals of flatbread dipped in goat milk cheese, accompanied by cool jugs of barley beer. The murmur of conversation drifts up the incline. Jokes about sand-stained tunics, and the odd companion who tips over whenever he laughs too hard. One popular quip among the stone pullers is that if they ever stopped joking, they'd weigh more than the blocks they drag. This camaraderie echoes the modern practice of workplace banter, easing physical strain, highlighting how humour softens relentless toil across millennia. Higher still, the air thins and the scent of dried clay and crushed limestone masks the aroma of cooking fires below. You notice the rhythmic clatter of wooden rollers beneath sledges, their creaking wood bones talking back in creaks and groans. Some fringe storytellers claim that roller crews played percussion on spare tools during breaks, inventing an early form of work song that kept morale high. Though no inscriptions mention musical traditions on the ramps, researchers still argue whether such spontaneous performances punctuated the labour or remained simple rumour. Throughout the day, overseers circulate on small platforms jutting from ramp edges, adjusting the rope angles and ensuring no sledge veers off course. Their voices crack like desert lightning when issuing terse commands. Pull left or hold steady, then soften to laughter as they join in the workers' jests. You can almost taste the grit they spit from their mouths, a mix of sand and barley husk that collects in the corners of their lips. Despite the back-breaking effort, the men's spirits rarely flag. Each successful haul is met with a collective cheer that echoes off the pyramid's rising face. Near the top of the ramp, a tiered rest station awaits crews on rotation. Here, fresh camels deliver water skins filled at the Nile, and trays of figs and date cakes are passed hand to hand. The mingled sweetness and dryness of the fruit provides a quick energy boost as the sun bears down. Fringe rumours speak of privileged ramp crews rewarded with a sip of perfumed wine seasoned with juniper berries, an elite perk akin to modern bonus incentives. But no administrative records corroborate such luxuries, and historians still debate whether any special rations existed for the more skilled labourers. From this height, you gaze down the ramp's entire length, watching sledges inch upward like determined beetles climbing a hill. The stone face of Khufu's pyramid glows pale gold in the sun, its smooth casing stones reflecting light that dazzles younger workers and momentarily blinds them, eliciting groans of feigned dismay. This interplay of glare and silhouette lends a surreal quality to the sight, an illusion of molten stone suspended in mid-construction. Scholars still argue whether the casing was ever polished on site or only final buffed after completion, given that most casing stones have long since been removed. As twilight approaches, lantern-bearing stewards ascend the ramps to light oil lamps, small clay bowls filled with sesame oil and a twisted reed wick. Their flickering flames cast long shadows across the packed earth tiers, creating a moving collage of light and dark that hypnotizes onlookers. The soundscape shifts as well. The daytime chorus of chants gives way to softer hums and whispered encouragements. Supervisors call out the tally of stones moved that day, proud of nearing the halfway mark in Khufu's 20-year plan. The revelation of daily quotas, often recorded on ostraca fragments, demonstrates that productivity targets shaped work schedules, much as they do in modern construction projects. Night labor is reserved for final hour pushes when the desert chill falls. The cool air bites at sweaty skin, a welcome contrast to the oven-like heat of midday. Workers wrap themselves in spare woolen cloaks or loose linen, trading their usual tunics for added warmth. A thin fog sometimes rises from the ramp's moist base, curling around lanterns like a ghostly congregation. Fringe legends tell of nocturnal apparitions of Khufu's spirit, wandering the ramps at midnight, inspecting progress, and spurring workers on with silent resolve. No reliable texts confirm these supernatural visits, and historians still argue whether such legends emerged solely in later folk memory. As the night deepens, the pace slows but does not cease. Crews alternate between pulling and resting, their horn-snap whistles and staff taps reduced to occasional signals. Lantern light flickers across sweat-smeared faces, illuminating the determination in every furrowed brow. You feel the pulse of human persistence in each creaking rope, each murmured laugh, each breathless cheer as another block reaches its journey's end. The pyramid rises one stone at a time, a testament not only to divine ambition but to the resilience and community forged on these dusty ramps. When the final lamp guttering at the ramp's summit flares out, the sight hushes into a profound stillness. Mounds of unused stone cast long shapes across the plateau, awaiting another dawn. You inhale deeply, drawing in the blended scents of earth, sweat, and oil, and sense the ramp resting under a shared collective dream, that tomorrow, the same laughter and labour will bring Khufu's vision that much closer to touching the sky. Before dawn breaks over the Giza plateau, a hush falls across the vast construction site, broken only by the distant murmur of water flowing in the Nile and the soft scrape of leather sandals on packed earth. As the eastern sky reddens, the master foremen gather atop the highest completed course, now standing more than 140 meters above the ground, preparing to place the final pyramidion at the apex. This capstone, hewn from solid granite and gilded in thin sheets of electrum, embodies both the culmination of Khufu's earthly ambition and the promise of his soul's ascent to join the sun god Ra. A procession of priests leads the ceremony, bearing censers of frankincense whose smoke curls in silver ribbons around the granite faces. Mainstream accounts note that electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver mined at Wadi Hammamat, was prized for its luminous sheen, believed to catch the first rays of dawn and signal Khufu's rebirth each morning. Historians still argue whether the pyramidion's gilding extended to all four triangular faces, or only to the eastward side facing the rising sun, as most surviving references focus on solar symbolism without specifying full coverage. Surveyors perform final alignment checks using plumb bobs hung from wooden beams at each pyramid corner. Their straight lines converge almost perfectly at the apex, a testament to the precise calculations carried out centuries earlier in Hemiunu's midnight workshop. Fringe lore suggests that architects once suspended a polished obsidian sphere from the center to confirm absolute verticality by observing its reflection of the starlit sky, though no archaeological trace of such a sphere has ever been found, and scholars still debate whether any ancient Egyptian tools could achieve that degree of optical precision. At the base of the pyramidion, masons have carved small hieroglyphs invoking protection spells, a seated falcon god, the Ankh symbol of life, and an inscription reading Heka Khufu, meaning magic of Khufu. This mainstream detail appears on temple reliefs of later periods, indicating that Egyptians believed written spells imbued structures with enduring strength. Yet historians still argue whether these hieroglyphs were original features or later additions by the 5th dynasty's priests seeking to legitimize their rituals at the site. When priests give the signal, teams of 30 men leverage a final wooden capstone rigged above the apex. Ropes wound around the capstone's axis descend to sand-coated wooden sledges holding the granite pyramidion. With synchronized pulls, backs bent, and arms straining, the workers heave the capstone upward by mere centimeters at a time. Each tug sends a deep moan through the wooden beams, a collective heartbeat marking the pyramid's last ascent. Fringe accounts tell of a hidden ventilation shaft beneath the apex where water was poured to create hydraulic pressure, assisting the lift. But no physical evidence supports the existence of such shafts, and Egyptologists still debate whether any hydraulic techniques were ever employed in Old Kingdom construction. As the pyramidion begins to glide into its mortise, a shallow recess carved into the topmost limestone block, overseers apply a thin layer of gypsum mortar to cushion the fit. They work quickly before the mortar sets, their hands steady despite the nerves intensifying with each millimetre gained. Any imperfection could leave the capstone askew, marring Khufu's eternal monument. Modern reconstructions confirm that gypsum mortar would set slowly in the dry desert air, providing craftsmen a short window for adjustments. Yet scholars still argue whether original builders mixed additives, like crushed lapis lazuli or natron, to accelerate or retard the curing process for optimal placement. At the moment of final seating, priests release their incense and trumpeters sound short blasts on conch shells and copper horns, their notes echoing across the plateau. The electrum surfaces catch the first golden light, flashing bright as a divine beacon. Labourers below shield their eyes, staring upward as the pyramidion's eastern face ignites in dawn's glow. Fringe poetry from later Greco-Roman travellers describes the pyramidion as burning like the sun's own crown, though no first-hand Egyptian accounts survive, and historians still argue whether such hyperbole reflects actual spectacle or poetic license. Following the placement, a high priest pours libations of perfumed beer and wine at the base, invoking the life-giving waters of the Nile to flow eternally around Khufu's soul. Mainstream temple inscriptions record that this ritual connected the pharaoh's spirit to both terrestrial and celestial waters, symbolizing regeneration and eternal life. Yet some scholars still debate whether the libations occurred only once at consecration or were repeated annually during said festivals to renew the king's power. With the pyramidion set, scaffolding and ramps are quickly dismantled by teams working in low, scattered groups. The scaffold's wooden poles, ropes and planks are carefully catalogued and stored for future royal projects, while the ramp debris is spread across the desert to obscure any evidence of construction methods. Fringe theories claim that phantom architect societies retained secret ramp fragments in hidden chambers beneath the plateau, safeguarding arcane building knowledge. However, no credible archaeological finds support these narratives, and Egyptologists still argue over the whereabouts of any hidden chambers. By sunrise's end, the Great Pyramid stands complete, a monolithic silhouette against the cloudless sky, its polished sides reflecting light in shifting gradients as day advances. Workers gaze upward in awe, some whispering that no human hands could ever surpass such perfection, while others ponder the secrets still buried within its chambers. Scholars continue to explore shafts and tunnels in search of overlooked rooms, debating whether undiscovered inner sanctums might yield fresh insights into ancient engineering and religious practice. As the morning breeze stirs the desert dust, a procession of priests and officials sets out from Khufu's Valley Temple, circling the pyramid at its base in a solemn lap. They chant hymns for the pharaoh's safe passage to the afterlife and secure his legacy in both stone and spirit. And as they vanish beneath the rise of limestone terraces, the pyramid remains, eternal, inscrutable, and bathed in the nascent sun it was built to honour. In the gentle light of dawn, the colossal silhouette of Khufu's pyramid softens at the edges, its once blinding electrum capstone now warming to a muted golden hue. The desert winds sigh through the limestone courses, carrying whispers of countless hands that shaped every block. Feel the weight of time settle like soft sand around you as the site's clamour gives way to stillness. Even the Nile's steady flow seems to pause in reverence, its silken currents mirroring the pyramid's steadfast grace. Imagine yourself leaning against the cool stone, fingertips brushing the finely smoothed casing as imperfections fade beneath your touch. Inhale the mingled aromas of aged sandstone and lingering incense. Exhale any tension coiled in your muscles. Here, in this moment of hush, the vastness of human ambition and fragile mortality coalesce. The pyramid stands as both a monument to ambition and a reminder that even the grandest structures return to dust. Allow your breath to slow, matching the horizon's gradual brightening as the sun climbs higher. Thoughts drift like desert tumbleweeds, some unbidden remembrances of chisels and chants, others of distant stars glimpsed through midnight calculations. Let them pass without grasping, dissolving in the vast sky above the plateau. As light fully embraces the Great Pyramid, feel gratitude for the builders whose laughter and labor spanned decades to craft this silent sentinel. Trust in the lingering peace that follows creation's climax. With each heartbeat softly echoing your own insignificance and strength, you join the continuum of sleepers and dreamers who have gazed upon these stones and found solace in their enduring presence. Now, close your eyes if you wish, and carry the pyramid's quiet majesty into your dreams. Sweet horizons await beyond this waking world, where sands of time flow unhurried and ancient stones cradle your rest. Sweet dreams.